Many thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Business Week here on Arise News. I'm joined now by Dr. Juliet Ehimuan, who is former Google West Africa Director and founder of Beyond Limits, to discuss some of our top stories in detail this morning. Good morning to you. So Juliet, how are you today?
Very well, thank you.
It's always great to have you on Business Week. Yeah, we have quite a bit to get through today. Well, let's begin with the presidency announcing a 2 trillion naira economic stabilization plan. What are your general sentiments around this?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a welcome development, and it's clearly deliberate action to stimulate economic activity. And strategically, I can think about, 3 things that this is looking to do. One is it's a fiscal boost, injecting 2 trillion naira into critical sectors of the economy, so agriculture, food and agriculture, power and energy, and also healthcare and business growth. And also, it's very targeted investment in these sectors that can really have a multiplier effect. So if we think about power and energy, the injection of 500 billion naira, that is really investing in base infrastructure that can have a tremendous effect on a lot of other sectors. Agriculture, we've had security challenges, inflation. There's food security. Food security has been a challenge. And a lot of Nigerians have been suffering, right, with the food challenges. So injecting this capital, seed investment in the agricultural space is really critical. And, the third thing is just really stimulating more business activity. We know that the, interest rates at the moment is quite high, about 30%. And, for a company actually generating, way over 30% in profit is not a small feat, and you may have challenges servicing your debt. So, and Aliko Dangote was reported recently talking about the fact that, the 30% interest rates are likely to stifle economic growth. So I think certainly this will help to stimulate a lot more activity. And if this plan is implemented properly, it should make a difference.
So this is well needed and timely.
Absolutely.
All right then. Well, let's move on to African tech funding dropping to $780 million, the lowest in 4 years. What can we make of this development? What's responsible for this drop, of course, in juxtaposition against the rest of the global funding landscape?
Yes, so that number is really low. And if we just, look at things broadly, there has been a decline in recent years in global investment in tech, about 36% decline. But the decline for African startups has been a lot more. It is 57% year on year when you compare H1 this year with the same period last year. And what's also more disturbing is the fact that we're even, that is from an already small base, because that was probably just over $1 billion, right? Now we're looking at 780 million. To put that in context, global tech funding in 2023 was about $315 billion, which means Africa, which is 70% of the world's population, just had a share of less than 0.3% of total global funding. And, all of that investment to a continent is less than the R&D budget for some, IT companies. For example, last year, Alphabet and Meta invested about $75 billion each in R&D. Huawei invested $20.9 billion. Tencent invested about over $8 billion. So it's really a small factor, and it really begs the question, why? Because, we know that the population is here, the opportunity is here, we've got talent, and, on the flip side of every challenge is the opportunity for investments and growth and building businesses to address those challenges and to scale. So a few things, need to happen. One is just really looking at ways to establish this as an attractive market for investment. It's worth noting that 77% of the investment into Africa was to 4 key countries: Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, and South Africa. Now, if we zoom into Nigeria, as a foreign investor, if I think about currency devaluation, that's going to discourage me because I don't have confidence that I'll be able to get adequate return on my investments in one fell swoop. I might just, value can be eroded. And also just the enabling environment. So it's really important for the government to look at things like tax incentives, look at ways to increase investor confidence. While we're dealing with other macro factors, we need to walk and chew gum and look at how we can be very deliberate and strategic in encouraging, maybe de-risking investments as much as possible to just build that confidence. And also, we need to think about direct support for entrepreneurs because, the more successful our entrepreneurs are at building their businesses, the more likely they would be able to stand up to, global standards and the requirements of, global VC investors. And so thinking about, actually, if while we're trying to get the foreign community to invest in us, to bet on us, we're betting on ourselves. So, increasing support for entrepreneurship, looking at grants, looking at non-equity funding to startups, looking at, more incubators, accelerators, tech hubs, providing the support that they need, and just really making sure that we're encouraging internal investors with the tax incentives and other incentives I mentioned, just really encouraging internal investors to invest in the space. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it really requires deliberate, concerted effort.
So it's a two-way street there. And, I love that you mentioned the Big Four's performance as well, because, for about 5 years, we had Nigeria sort of leading the pack in terms of getting lots of investment until last year, where Kenya became the front runner at $800 million, which from what you're saying right now is nothing to be excited about comparatively, looking against the global landscape. So
Absolutely.
Very cogent points you've highlighted there. Well, let's move on swiftly to Afrexim Bank positing that divesting from fossil fuels could reduce Nigeria's GDP by $30 billion. What can we make of this?
Yes. So, climate change is it's arguably the largest existential crisis we face as humanity. Traditionally, our energy generation has been from fossil fuels, and that generates carbon emissions that are not great for the environment, has resulted in global warming, which has some strong ecological factors affecting communities, and we're seeing the impact of that. Right? So it's really important to look at more renewable, clean energy sources. And that's something that is a shared responsibility for, all of us because we share the planet. However, having said that, when you look at global emissions, Africa is actually the least contributor. Africa contributes about 4% to the total CO2 emissions globally, and we are responsible for 17% of the world's population. If you compare that with, say, the US, which is 4% of the world's population, emissions from the US last year in comparison were about 13%, right? So we are very much at the beginning of the curve. We're in a situation where, about a huge percentage of the population on the continent doesn't have access to electricity. About 600 million Africans are without electricity. Our overall energy consumption is about 6% of the world's consumption. So when you're looking to solve a problem, you go to where the challenge is biggest, because that's where you get the maximum impact. And that is not Africa. If we look at investment in fossil fuels across the world in 2023, we'll see that in the US, investment was about $950 billion, which is almost $1 trillion. In China, that was $850 billion. In the European Union, it was over $400 billion. In Africa, it was just $100 billion. And again, Africa is 17% of the world's population. So really, if we're looking for maximum impact, which we should be, then we should be looking more at the West. It doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility in Africa, but I don't think that we should have the same pressures of divestment as the rest of the world. I think African markets should have a longer runway, because if you think about the impact on the economy, and economies that are reliant on oil production, that really accounts for a huge part of budgetary revenues, fiscal revenues, job creation. In Nigeria, oil, fossil fuel is responsible for about 95% of our foreign income and about 80% of our, budgetary revenues. And without proper economic diversification strategies in place, right? Just looking at divestment now, I agree 100% with what the MD, the CEO of Afrexim Bank mentioned. It's going to have a strong effect on our economies. $30 billion reduction in GDP for Nigeria, and across Africa about $190 billion. And so I think there should be a longer runway. And rather than talking about divesting right now from Africa, we should be looking at active investment into cleaner alternatives. So, for example, gas, right? Gas is a cleaner form of, a fossil fuel, and eliminating gas flaring, leveraging that gas for energy generation, investing actively in that. And we have, great local companies in the oil and gas space that are looking at investing in the gas, investing in gas, looking at building capacity and helping to drive investment so that we can scale real solutions around using solar energy, wind, and hydroelectric energy. So I think we should be thinking more about active, deliberate investments that can help facilitate that transition, right, in Africa, rather than, very immediate divestment. And for sure, given that climate change is a challenge we need to face one way or the other, let's double down on where we can get the most impact and work our way from there. Right.
So more deliberate, realistic deliberate approach, like you've put. So that, we shouldn't be carrying the weight if we're we're a lesser culprit, right? in less words. We don't really have a lot of time, so let's move on to Samsung shares hitting over a 3-year high owing to AI boosting profits.
Yes, so that's great for Samsung, and it just really double clicks on the fact that the AI boom right now is generating a lot of growth for businesses. A lot of that revenue growth comes from their semiconductor business. One of the unique things about Samsung is they're a device manufacturer, but they also manufacture chips, right? Unlike companies like Apple that are solely focused on the device and then they outsource the chip manufacturing to other companies. So Samsung does both, and it did record that a huge part of that boom, the 15-fold increase that it has experienced, was really from the chip business. And, with artificial intelligence, there's a huge amount of processing that is required, a lot of huge amounts of data, and that requires strong semiconductor chips, a lot of processing power, and we've seen that success with companies like NVIDIA as well, the largest chip manufacturer in the world. So it's really a huge upside for Samsung.
Right, certainly. The stock climbed as much as 2.24% yesterday. So like you said, that's quite a monument. I wish we had more time to, round up, but many thanks, as always, Dr. Juliet Ehimuan, for being here with us today on Business Week. And we'll see you again very soon.
Thank you.
Many thanks.